They didn't even try to hide their laughter at my place of work. You know that kind of laugh, half snort, half whisper, just loud enough so you hear it, but soft enough so they can pretend it wasn't about you. That was the soundtrack of my first year working the night shift as a janitor at Harrington Tech. It started with a mop and a pair of old work boots. I was 28, broke, and freshly divorced. The kind of divorced where you lose your apartment, your savings, and even the damn blender. I needed a job, any job, and the only one that would take me without a college degree or recent references was janitorial work at this fancy tech company downtown. I remember walking into that glass building for the first time. Marble floors, shining lights, and people in blazers talking about IPOs and app launches like they ruled the world. I didn't even make it 5 steps in before a young guy in a slim-fit suit gave me that look, the one that says, "You don't belong here." He wasn't wrong. But the thing is, I wasn't there to belong. I was there to survive. At first, I kept my head down. Cleaned the same bathrooms every night, mopped the same hallways. I emptied trash cans while tech interns played ping pong and left empty energy drink cans all over their desks. They barely looked at me, unless it was to snicker or joke about how I must have taken a wrong turn on career day. One guy, Evan, I'll never forget him, called me Floor Daddy. Every time I walked past their break room, he'd slap his friend's arm and go, "Careful, here comes Floor Daddy. Hope he doesn't mop up your resume." Yeah. Hilarious. I'd smile politely and keep walking. But inside, it burned. Not because I was ashamed of being a janitor. Honest work is honest work. What stung was how they acted like I was invisible, or worse, like I was beneath them. They didn't know me. They didn't know the hours I worked or the things I gave up to keep going. And they damn sure didn't know what I was planning. Because, here's the part they didn't see, while I cleaned, I listened. Not just to music or podcasts, though I did plenty of that, too. I listened to them. The product meetings, the brainstorming sessions, the casual hallway conversations where they forgot I existed. I learned about how the company was structured, which teams were strong, which ones were crumbling, which managers were respected, and which were quietly hated. Over time, I started picking up terms I'd never known before. APIs. Cloud architecture. Venture capital. Seed funding. I jotted down notes in a little black notebook I kept in my locker. At night, after my shift ended at 2 a.m., I'd go home, make a cup of ramen, and research everything I'd heard. I watched hours of YouTube lectures on business models. Read startup blogs. Listened to investor interviews. I learned how tech companies grew, and more importantly, how they fell apart. It wasn't a plan at first. Just curiosity. Maybe even a way to keep my brain alive while my hands scrubbed toilet seats. But one night, something changed. I overheard a conversation in the stairwell. 2 junior managers were arguing about the company's Series B funding. Apparently, the CEO had overpromised on user growth and now investors were getting cold feet. One of them said, "We're burning cash like crazy. If we don't get a buyout or pivot soon, we're screwed." That sentence hit me like a slap in the face. Screwed? This company looked bulletproof from the outside. Ping pong tables, catered lunches, rooftop parties, they were living it up. But underneath it all? Cracks. I went home that night with my mind racing. For the first time, I didn't just see Harrington Tech as the place I mopped floors, I saw it as an opportunity. I stayed up until 5 a.m. reading everything I could about acquisitions and private investors. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. Something inside me had woken up. It took months, long, quiet months, of saving, researching, and building a small network online. I found a couple of mentors through startup forums who answered my annoying questions. I learned how to read financial reports. I started investing tiny amounts of money, just $50 here and there, into stocks and crypto. Not because I expected to get rich, but because I wanted to understand money. I wanted to understand power. And while I learned, I kept pushing that mop. I let them laugh. Let them call me names. Let them assume I was just another faceless cleaner who'd disappear before anyone ever remembered his name. What they didn't realize was that every trash can I emptied brought me one step closer. Every floor I scrubbed gave me more time to listen. And every arrogant joke they cracked added fuel to a fire they couldn't see. They thought I was just the janitor. They had no idea I was studying them. Planning something big. I didn't grow up dreaming of buying a company. Honestly, I didn't even know that was something a person like me could do. But once I saw how shaky things were behind the curtain at Harrington Tech, I couldn't unsee it. They were making big mistakes that no one wanted to fix. Or maybe they didn't know how. Either way, it was hard to ignore. I kept working nights, 6 days a week, and I didn't complain. I was patient. That's the part they never saw, my patience. While they bragged about their 10x growth and agile development during team lunches, I was there mopping the corners of rooms they forgot they used. I heard it all. The sales team couldn't hit their targets. The app had bugs that kept crashing the user experience. Their client retention rate? Terrible. The worst part was, nobody seemed to take responsibility. They passed blame around like hot potatoes, pretending everything was fine so long as the lobby still smelled like lavender and the boardroom snacks were stocked. I could have written a soap opera from the drama I overheard. Backstabbing, secret job interviews at competitor firms, even a quiet hush-hush resignation of one of the co-founders. From the outside, Harrington looked like the next big unicorn. But on the inside? It was a sinking ship wrapped in LED lighting. I started keeping tabs on everything: names, trends, behaviors. I wasn't trying to be sneaky. I just watched, listened, paid attention. And what I saw was a group of people who had too much money and not enough discipline. They were good at raising capital, sure, but terrible at keeping it. One night around 1 a.m., I found a whiteboard left uncovered in a glass-walled meeting room. It had a list of potential acquisition targets scribbled across it. Some were small tech companies, others were back-end solutions. I took a photo of it with my flip phone, not because I planned to leak it, but because I wanted to learn why those companies were valuable. I'd go home, Google every name, read their business models, and reverse engineer what made them worth acquiring. I started to understand the game. And then something happened that pushed everything into motion. A guy from accounting, I think his name was Brent, got a little too drunk at a company happy hour. I was cleaning the lobby when he stumbled out with his arms slung around another employee, slurring about how the company's gonna bleed out before Christmas if Jake doesn't get his head out of his ass. Jake was the CEO. That same week, I noticed a change. A few upper-level people quit quietly. The catered lunches got a little less fancy. New hires stopped showing up on Mondays. And the energy? It shifted. Even the cocky ones like Evan weren't laughing as loud anymore. That's when I knew I had a window. A small one. But it was there. I started reaching out to every contact I'd made in those forums and networking events I could afford to sneak into. I didn't tell them where I worked. I just asked questions, offered to help with projects for free, even cleaned floors during the day for smaller startups just to be in the room. A guy named Carlos took me under his wing. He was a former tech founder turned investor. He liked that I asked dumb questions. He said it reminded him of himself back in the day. He let me sit in on some of his Zoom calls, told me where to read term sheets, and helped me understand what a company actually looks like on paper when it's in trouble. I kept saving. Every penny. No nights out, no unnecessary bills. I drove a 1999 Toyota with no AC and a dent in the door. I ate noodles and eggs more times than I can count. I wasn't poor anymore, I was focused. Then, one night, I overheard something that made my stomach drop. A group of marketing execs were huddled in the hallway talking about layoffs. Not just a few. A lot. Apparently, the company had blown through most of its funding cushion. A huge investor backed out. They were 2 quarters from bankruptcy unless a miracle happened. I went home and stayed up until the sun came up. I didn't sleep. I barely blinked. Because I knew something no one else did. I could be the miracle. I had just enough connections, just enough savings, and just enough nerve to make a move. I wasn't planning to walk in with a briefcase full of cash. I wasn't rich. But I'd learned that you don't have to own money, you just need to know how to attract it. How to make people believe in your idea. And I had one. If I could put together a group of small-time investors, people like Carlos and a few others I'd met, I could create a buyer group. A legitimate one. Not to buy the company while it was thriving, but to scoop it up when it hit rock bottom. And trust me, it was falling faster than anyone realized. They laughed at me when I was cleaning their messes. But they had no idea I was quietly preparing to clean up the biggest mess of all, and come out owning the place they thought I wasn't good enough to walk through. The first time I ever stepped into a bank boardroom, I was wearing my only button-up shirt, the one I usually saved for funerals or weddings. It was 2 sizes too big and smelled like lemon detergent because I'd soaked it in dish soap the night before. I didn't own cologne, so I dabbed a bit of rubbing alcohol on my neck. I read somewhere it smelled clean. That was all I had to offer, clean. I wasn't some hotshot startup guy. I didn't have an MBA or a slick pitch deck with graphs and buzzwords. I had one thing, an idea backed by years of silent observation and a growing storm of desperation at Harrington Tech. I met with Carlos and 2 of his associates that afternoon. The other 2 were older guys, gray hair, expensive watches, the kind of men who'd usually ignore a guy like me if they saw me mopping the floor of their office. But Carlos vouched for me. "This is the guy I was telling you about," he said. "The janitor who thinks like a CEO." I laughed when he said it. Nervous, awkward laugh. But I leaned into it. "Look," I said, "I'm not here to sell you a dream. I'm just asking for the chance to show you a broken company and how I think it can be saved. You can throw it away after this meeting if you think I'm nuts." And then I talked. For almost 30 minutes straight. I laid out everything I'd noticed at Harrington over the past 2 years. The bloated departments. The burned investor relationships. The turnover. The morale. The lack of accountability. I explained the value in the software they'd built, how the back end had potential if run efficiently. I even suggested ways it could be streamlined to cut costs by 40%, just from things I'd heard in the hallways. When I finished, the room was quiet. One of the older guys, Richard, I think his name was, looked me in the eye and said, "You're either the most observant janitor I've ever met, or you've been casing this company like a man about to rob it." I didn't flinch. I told him, "I'm not robbing it. I'm rescuing it." They didn't say yes that day. But they didn't say no, either. A few days later, Carlos called and said, "We're in. You've got our backing. Now go get the numbers." That's when the real work started. I went home and built a basic proposal in Google Docs. Nothing fancy. I didn't even use PowerPoint, I didn't know how. But I made it clear. The buyout would only work if Harrington officially hit crisis mode. So I waited. And in the meantime, I kept doing my job. Mopping. Cleaning. Wiping fingerprints off doors. Smiling at the same people who never bothered to learn my name. I knew it was only a matter of time. One Friday, I came into work and noticed the vending machines were half empty. The receptionist, usually bubbly, looked like she'd been crying. By the time I got to the break room, I overheard the news. Layoffs had started. 40 employees. Just like that. The buzz around the office changed instantly. Desks cleared out. The energy was heavy. No more ping-pong breaks or loud Friday laughs. Harrington was bleeding out, and fast. That night, after my shift, I pulled out the letter I'd been sitting on for 3 weeks. A formal offer to buy the company, backed by Carlos and the others. I had a lawyer look it over, the same one who'd helped my cousin with a car accident lawsuit years ago. It was basic, but legal. I addressed it to Jake, the CEO. I slipped it into an envelope. And before I could second-guess myself, I walked back into the building, found his office door, and slid the letter under it. Then I walked home in the dark, unsure if I'd just made the boldest move of my life, or the dumbest. The next few days were agonizing. Jake didn't respond. I kept showing up, punching in, doing my job. No one said anything to me. But on the 4th night, the security guard handed me an envelope when I clocked out. It was from Jake. His response. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Meet me Tuesday, 10 a.m. Conference Room C, bring your people." That was it. I sat on the bus for the next 45 minutes with that paper clutched in my hand like a lottery ticket. My palms were sweaty. My brain was spinning. But somewhere underneath all of it, I felt it, that steady voice inside saying, "This is your shot. Don't miss it." So I didn't. I didn't sleep the night before the meeting. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I was going to say, over and over. I must have rewritten the pitch in my head 50 different ways. But every version came back to the same truth. I wasn't trying to take over the company to hurt anyone. I was trying to save it. Tuesday morning, I wore the same oversized shirt, this time ironed as best as I could manage with a towel and a hot pan. My shoes were scuffed, but they were clean. I got to the building early, hours before the meeting. I didn't want to look like the janitor that day. I wanted to look like someone who had a reason to be in that room. Carlos met me out front. He was dressed like he always was, sharp, but simple. He clapped me on the back and handed me a portfolio with all the documents I'd need inside. He smiled and said, "You ready to own the place you used to mop?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I was. My stomach was doing flips, but I had to show up like I'd been here 100 times before. Confidence is louder than nerves, that's what Carlos always said. When we stepped into conference room C, Jake was already there, sitting with 2 of the remaining board members. His face looked tired. Like someone who hadn't just had a bad week, but a bad year. The weight of the layoffs, the investor calls, the angry emails, all of it was written on his face. He didn't say much at first. Just nodded at me and gestured for us to sit. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in 2 years. "You're Marcus, right?" he asked. I nodded. "That's me." He sighed. "You've worked here for how long?" "Little over 2 years," I said. He stared at me for a second, then shook his head and gave a small laugh. "I never would have guessed." And just like that, the meeting began. Carlos did most of the talking at first. He explained the financial structure of the offer. It wasn't a hostile takeover or some dramatic buyout. It was a rescue operation. A soft landing for the remaining team, and a second chance for the company's assets to survive under new leadership. Jake asked tough questions. So did the board. They weren't stupid, they wanted to know how a janitor was suddenly in a position to make moves like this. I told them the truth. That I'd listened, watched, and learned while everyone else was too busy showing off. That I'd built relationships outside the building, stayed up late studying, and saved every dollar I could. That I knew their software better than some of their own managers did, because I'd quietly downloaded the demo version and used it myself at home to understand its structure. One of the board members, a woman named Lee, leaned forward and said, "You think you can really run this thing?" I didn't even hesitate. "I think I can run it better than the people who've been burning it to the ground for the past year." That hit harder than I expected. Jake leaned back, rubbed his jaw, and let out a long breath. Carlos slid the final offer packet across the table. "This is it," he said. "No tricks. No games. You either let the company die, or let someone else try to bring it back to life." The room went quiet. Jake didn't respond right away. He picked up the folder, flipped through a few pages, and then looked back at me. "I didn't see you coming," he said. I smiled. Most people don't see the janitor. 2 days later, I got the call. The board had voted. The deal was accepted. I stood in my tiny apartment kitchen, staring at my cracked phone screen, while Carlos' voice came through the speaker. "It's yours," he said. "We're in." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, letting the weight of it settle. 2 years ago, I was scrubbing toilets in a company bathroom. Now, I was going to be sitting at the head of the table. And no one saw it coming. The first thing I did when the paperwork was finalized was show up on a Monday morning in a real suit. I walked through the front doors, past the security desk, and straight into the same elevator I used to clean gum off of. People stared. Some whispered. Others looked confused. One of the engineers, Trey, I think, actually did a double take. "Wait, are you the new VP or something?" I turned to him and said, "Nah. I'm the new owner." He blinked. "You're joking?" "Nope." And then I walked straight into the corner office that used to belong to Jake. My name wasn't on the door yet. But it would be. I didn't come to gloat. I came to build. And the people who once laughed at me? They weren't laughing anymore. The first week as owner of Harrington Tech didn't feel real. I'd dreamed of this moment for so long that I thought I'd be ready. But let me tell you something, owning a company isn't glamorous. It's exhausting. Especially when that company is bleeding from every corner. The first thing I did? I got rid of the free coffee. I know that sounds petty, but it wasn't. The company had been spending nearly $2,000 a month on fancy coffee subscriptions and machines that nobody even cleaned. Meanwhile, employees were getting laid off, bills were unpaid, and vendors were chasing us down for money. So yeah, the coffee had to go. And that was just the beginning. I made a list. A long one. Marketing contracts we didn't need, cut. A cloud storage deal 3 times more expensive than it should have been, renegotiated. 2 directors who hadn't shipped a single product in 6 months, replaced. People called it aggressive. Some called it heartless. But I wasn't trying to win a popularity contest. I was trying to keep the lights on. And you know what? Slowly, things started turning around. I wasn't afraid to do the dirty work, literally. One night, after everyone left, I found myself wiping down whiteboards and straightening chairs before a big investor meeting the next morning. Old habits, I guess. But as I stood there in my blazer, cleaning up the same room I used to mop, I couldn't help but smile. There was something poetic about it. Like life had brought me full circle. But not everyone was happy to see me in charge. A few of the old guard, the ones who used to brush past me in the halls, made it clear they didn't respect me. One of them, Dennis, actually walked into my office and said, "So what now, the janitor runs the show? What are we, a sitcom?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No. We're a business that needs saving. You either get on board or you get out of the way." He resigned 2 days later. Good riddance. The truth is, some people can't handle seeing someone they look down on rise up. Especially when that person knows where all the cracks are. They're not used to being held accountable by someone they used to ignore. But I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for the people who still cared. The ones who stayed late without being asked. The ones who still believed the company had a future. Like Maria, from support, who handled angry clients with grace even when the system crashed. Or Jordan, the junior developer, who taught himself 2 coding languages just to fix the mess a whole team had left behind. Those were my people. They were the real engine of the company. And I made sure they knew it. I started a new bonus system, not based on titles, but on actual results. I opened up weekly Q&A sessions where any employee could ask me anything. No filters. No PR spin. Just honesty. We also rebranded. I didn't change the company name, but I made sure the story behind it changed. I told people the truth about how someone who started at the bottom saw value where others didn't, and fought to keep the ship from sinking. I wasn't shy about my past. I leaned into it. And something strange happened. People started taking pride in the new story. Not because I was some genius, but because they saw that this place was finally being led by someone who gave a damn. But success didn't come overnight. We had setbacks. A server outage nearly tanked a major client deal. An investor pulled out last minute after reading some old reports. And yeah, there were nights when I questioned everything, nights where I sat alone in that big office and wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. But every time I felt doubt creep in, I remembered the feeling of being invisible. I remembered walking past those glass-walled conference rooms while holding a mop, hearing laughter and seeing people treat me like furniture. I remembered the guys who laughed when I walked into the break room and the ones who never said thank you when I changed the trash cans. And I remembered how I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd make sure no one in that building ever felt like I did. So I kept showing up. Kept listening. Kept fighting. And little by little, we grew. Revenue stopped declining. Clients started staying. Former employees reached out asking if there were openings again. One of them even said, "I heard the janitor's doing a better job than the last 3 CEOs combined." I took that as a compliment. We weren't out of the woods yet. But we were finally on a path. A real one. Not smoke and mirrors. Not empty promises. Just steady, honest progress. And as I stood in the middle of the office one evening, watching the team laugh and work and build something together, I realized something. They used to laugh at me. Now they worked for me. Funny how life works. The 1-year mark hit on a rainy Thursday. I remember because I was standing in the lobby, watching the automatic doors slide open and close while the receptionist laughed at something on her screen. It was the same lobby I used to mop, where people used to pretend I wasn't even there. But now, they smiled when they saw me. Not because I owned the place, most of them didn't even know that yet. It was because they knew me. I was always walking around, asking questions, checking in, listening. I wasn't hidden in some fancy office like the old CEOs. I was on the floor. With them. Always. That Thursday, we officially broke even. For the first time in over 2 years, the company made a profit. It wasn't a huge amount. Nothing to brag about in Forbes. But it was ours. Clean, honest, earned. Carlos called me around noon and said, "You realize what you just did, right? You turned a collapsing company around without laying off your soul." I laughed and said, "Barely. And I'm still drinking instant coffee." But deep down, I was proud. Not because I wanted a headline, but because I kept my promise, to myself, to my team, to the people who worked hard for this place. I also started getting a lot of messages from old coworkers. Some of them congratulated me. A few of them asked if I had job openings. And then there were the ones who ghosted me when I was still the janitor, suddenly trying to reconnect like nothing happened. I didn't hold grudges, but I also didn't forget. I hired who made sense for the business, not who suddenly found me inspiring. But the real moment that hit me? It came at an internal event we held that month. Just a casual Friday team gathering, nothing fancy. Someone ordered pizza. Another brought in their dog. We had music playing and laughter bouncing off the walls. And then Jordan, that junior developer who had gone above and beyond from day one, stood up in front of everyone and raised a paper cup of soda. "I just want to say," he said, "a year ago, none of us knew what was going to happen to this company. Some of us were already polishing our resumes. And then this guy," he pointed at me, "the guy who used to mop the floors, stepped in and saved it. So here's to second chances. And to bosses who never forget where they came from." The room clapped. Some cheered. I don't even remember what I said in return. My face was hot. My chest felt like it was about to burst. I nodded, smiled, raised my cup too. But inside, I was just overwhelmed. Because no matter how far I'd come, I still remembered the guy scrubbing gum off bathroom tiles with a toothbrush. The guy who ate ramen in a freezing apartment. The guy who people laughed at when he dared to sit in the break room like he belonged there. I remembered all of it. And I also remembered the day Jake, the former CEO, stopped by the office. It was a quiet morning. He came by unannounced, wearing jeans and a windbreaker. I was in the middle of checking on our new UI project when someone knocked and said, "Your guest is here." I stepped into the hallway and saw him standing there, looking unsure. We walked into a small meeting room and sat down. He looked tired, but different. Humble, maybe. "I wanted to see it for myself," he said. "Well, here it is," I replied. He nodded, slowly. "I didn't see it back then. What you were capable of. I just didn't look." "I know," I said. There was a long silence. And then he said something I didn't expect. "You did good, Marcus. Better than I ever did." I didn't need the compliment. But hearing it from him? That hit different. Before he left, I asked if he had any regrets. He smiled faintly and said, "Too many. But the biggest one was thinking titles meant more than work. You reminded me they don't." And then he left. I stood there for a moment, letting that settle. See, people always think success comes with a flashy car, a mansion, a fancy watch. But for me, it came in moments like that. In earning respect I never thought I'd get. In proving that kindness, grit, and patience were worth more than status or suits. And if you asked me what I'd say to the people who used to laugh at me, I'd say thank you. Because without that silence in the hallways, without those looks when I sat too close in the break room, without the chuckles when I showed up to meetings with a notepad I bought at a dollar store, I wouldn't be here. They made me invisible. But that's the thing about invisible people. We see everything. And one day, we rise. Not for revenge, but for respect. So yeah, I used to be the janitor. But now? The floor is mine. And I keep it clean. Thanks for watching. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories like this one. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? I'd love to hear your story. Until next time, stay strong, stay humble, and never stop believing in yourself. See you in the next video.